Okay. All right. Welcome everyone to another episode of the Mindgasms podcast. I'm excited I get to talk to Bill Ferraiolo again today, who's a professor of philosophy and a big fan of Stoicism. And we talked before about Stoicism and other related topics. And I wanted today to talk about Cynicism and how it led into Stoicism, and I've been doing some research on that. And then also because I've been doing research and talking with some of my friends lately about postmodernism and pragmatism, I thought we could talk about the similarities and differences between all of these different philosophies. So, yeah, why don't you just tell everyone a little bit about yourself there, Bill, and then we can go from there.
Sure, I'll do the best I can to help you out. But I know some of that stuff, some other stuff I might struggle with. Nothing special about me. I'm a guy named Bill. I teach philosophy. I wrote this book right here. If you buy it, I make like $2 when you do that.
Yeah,
So
I got mine here.
there you go. There it is. Um, Other than that, I'm a guy who teaches philosophy at a place called San Joaquin Delta College in Stockton, California. Live up the road in Lodi. Been doing it for about 21 years out here. A few more years before that at the University of Oklahoma. And I got a beard.
Yeah, I got big philosopher beard.
Yeah, I'm not bald. I look bald on most of my internet shots, but I have a full head of hair. So there's that, and there's nothing else interesting about me. My
Wow,
kids are in the other
other
room
than
playing.
your, oh, sorry.
That's like I said. My kids are in the other room playing Scrabble. Here's one cool thing. See this? This is my
Oh
cat,
yeah,
Sid. My cat, he's named
cool.
after Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha's real name.
Oh, cool.
And my dog is named Bodhi. Bodhi is the Sanskrit or Pali word for wisdom, also kind of a Buddhist reference. So,
Oh,
cat,
cool.
yeah.
Yeah, I remember we were talking before, and one of the reasons we got talking to each other in the first place was you sent me that paper that you wrote on the similarities between Buddhism and Stoicism, which I thought was really fascinating.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I wrote that, I don't know, probably 12 or 14 years ago. It's entitled Roman Buddha, and it's available online. And people can go to, I think it's at westernbuddhism.com. And you can also get it at myacademia.edu page. You can click on it.
Send me the link to that when we're done, and I'll add it to the description of this video again there.
Yeah, okay, I can do that.
Sure. Cool. So, yeah, like I said, do you want to start off with kind of how cynicism led into stoicism? I know I know you were telling me right before we started this that I got confused about the different Diogenes and was reading the lives and opinions of eminent philosophers by Diogenes Laertius, who is different from Diogenes the Cynic, which is Diogenes of Sinope. And I remember I remember it was interesting in that book. Was reading about Diogenes the Cynic, and I remember you mentioned in our previous conversation that I think you mentioned that Diogenes, he was defacing coinery.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
His motto was deface the coinage. Apparently, either he or his father had actually been in charge of a mint back in Sinope, and that was part of the reason he got booted out. He got exiled. But when he uses the expression deface the coinage, he appears to be referring to defacing the social constructs, cultural constructs that make no sense. So he did a lot of very shocking and taboo things in public. He made a point of just sort of defacing the customs and demonstrating that they were either silly or pointless or counterproductive. But I'm sorry, I kind of interrupted you. Go ahead and ask a
oh
question.
yeah, that's basically what I was gonna say that I learned from that book that I thought was interesting because the defacing the coinage was a way of like defacing the social constructs of that culture, and that his dad was a banker too. And I thought it was interesting too that at least according to that book, he got that idea from the uh, the Oracle of Delos, I think it was.
Delphi?
I think in the book it said it was the Oracle of Delos, and then he went to the Oracle of Delphi after that. But I mean, I could be wrong,
No,
obviously.
it's possible. I can confuse those two myself. Um,
Yeah.
Wherever he got the idea, he became a kind of a famous figure in Athens. Plato referred to him as a Socrates gone mad. The idea was
Yeah,
that,
I thought that was interesting.
yeah, he took Socrates and his austerity to its its extreme. He lived in a barrel or a wine cask. He owned nothing. He would beg for food and money, and sometimes wasn't exactly begging. It was almost chastising people as they walked by. He called him. They called him the cynic. Cynic means dog. So Socrates the dog. He's often depicted as having a dog sitting next to him
Oh,
because he,
right. Yeah, I remember that from that book too.
yeah, he kind of lived a dog-like existence. He would growl at people he didn't like, and he allegedly some kids were making fun of him, or some young men were making fun of him, so he went over and urinated on their leg. He would he would masturbate in public. He would eat in the agora where you weren't supposed to do that. He allegedly defecated in public. Just basically, he would engage in what he regarded as natural behaviors, but it's taboo to do them in public. And I think the suggestion was, and look, this is what the body requires, whether you're in public or private. And regarding it as shameful, that's just a social construct. That's just made up. Um, Now, I don't advocate doing that stuff in public, but I am a very big fan of Diogenes and of the Cynics. I always tell people I'm at least as much a cynic as I am a Stoic.
Oh,
Sto
cool.
Yeah, Stoicism is just more palatable to the general public, and that's really where it came from. Uh, Zeno, the founder of Stoicism, Zeno of Citium or Citium, he interacted with the Stoics, Antisthenes, Crates, people like that, and he liked what they were doing. He liked the idea of a simple life, a virtuous life, a life devoted to wisdom and virtue and nothing else, no other concerns. But I guess he did not believe he could get a lot of people on board with jerking off in public and defecating in public. So there was an effort to make it more accessible to mainstream people. And so what started off as cynicism kind of became, at least one offshoot of it, became Stoicism. And then through Epictetus and through Seneca, and of course through Marcus Aurelius, this became one of the dominant strands of philosophy throughout the Roman Empire for several centuries after the death of Alexander the Great. So the Cynics and the Stoics, enormously influential figures in the ancient world.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I thought it was like it was interesting that that Diogenes had like disciples even in spite of his behavior, like living in a barrel and shit
Yes.
like that. And I thought it was interesting too that Zeno, he was more of a follower of those philosophers you mentioned, like Crate or Crates. I'm not sure how you pronounce his name, but
Brady, you usually say
Crates.
the in the ancient Greek words, you usually say the vowels kind of as long vowel sounds.
Oh, okay. I
So,
wasn't sure if it was that way or the other way.
yeah, I
Uh,
think most people pronounce it Crates.
okay.
Yeah.
Crates. So do you know why he found he liked those philosophers more than Diogenes in particular?
Well, I don't know that I don't know that he liked them more than Diogenes.
Oh, okay.
It's a question. It's kind of a question of descent. All the Hellenistic schools, they all claim a lineage that traces back to Socrates. The skeptics claim this, the Stoics claim this, the Cynics claim this, and so on. Because Socrates was, just this tremendous hero of the ancient Greco-Roman world. So they all wanted to lay claim to his mantle. Like we're doing what Socrates intended, right? That was the claim. So depending upon what you focus on, you could end up as a skeptic or as a cynic or perhaps as a Stoic. Um, I think Zeno and the other early Stoics, they were impressed with the cynics and the degree to which they were able to focus solely on wisdom and virtue and to be utterly unconcerned about whether people, were appalled by them, to be utterly unconcerned with um, silly social customs, like you use this finger for this kind of gesture. That's an insult, but this other finger is not an insult, and it's actually a compliment. They thought that was all just ridiculous, right?
Right.
Your fingers and your hands are for doing things, with picking up things and eating and so on. They thought that was all sort of silly. Dress codes, you wear this kind of garment in this place, but you don't wear this kind of garment in this other place. That was just kind of silly.
Right.
So I think the early Stoics all admired that. But when it comes to, listen, if I have to defecate right now and I'm in a crowd full of people, I'm just going to go ahead and do it. They kind of figured, yeah, people are not going to get on board with that. We're not
Yeah.
going to convince a lot of people that that's permissible. We're not going to get them to do that. We're not going to get a lot of people to live outside or live in wine barrels. Uh,
Yeah.
we're talking to people who, they have wives and kids and families to take care of, but they want to live virtuous lives. So we're never going to talk them into living like Diogenes, but maybe we can approximate that in something more like a mainstream life, you know, conforming to the time and the culture and so on.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. I think it's interesting too, the focus with Diogenes and Cynicism on what they call like pursuing the natural pleasures, like enjoying the sun on your face and stuff like that, like they said, and then ignoring other what they consider to be distractions in life. So I think it's interesting that there's that, and then with Stoicism there's more of an emphasis on like actually being involved in the world and political involvement and stuff like that. And I think it's interesting that once it gets to Stoicism, there's that division between Stoicism and Epicureans. So would you say that Epicureanism is more similar to Cynicism than Stoicism because of that lack of focus on political involvement and stuff like that?
Perhaps in that one facet, it would be. People like Diogenes and Antisthenes, all the entire political sphere, as far as they were concerned, was silly. It was just ridiculous. Man-made laws are absurd. The only laws, see, the first use of the word cosmopolitan, as far as we know, was Diogenes.
Oh,
And
cool.
I think that term has really been warped over the years. People now use it to mean that we embrace all of the world in one giant fellowship. Well, Diogenes meant nothing remotely like that. When he called himself a cosmopolitan, what he meant was he was only subject to natural law, the laws of the cosmos.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, that's where the term comes from. I'm subject to the laws of the cosmos. As for man-made laws, don't waste my time with that nonsense. That's ridiculous. You're just making that up and superimposing it on the natural world. I don't have to obey your silly laws. Whereas the Stoics, they wanted people who did sort of live conventional lives and were inclined to obey those silly laws. They wanted them nonetheless to pursue wisdom and virtue. The Epicureans also thought that this whole business of politics was either silly or pointless, or they thought it was so enervating and so aggravating that you just could never really be at ease if you were involved in politics.
Oh, okay.
Kind of like it is today, right? Try to have a political discussion with a liberal and a conservative and see if you don't end up really aggravated and
Yeah.
both parties are. The Epicureans thought, yeah, just stay out of that. The Stoics thought, well, you didn't have to be directly involved in politics, but someone had to be. Someone had to run the polis. Someone had to be in charge of trying to direct those who were running it. Seneca was obviously involved in politics. Marcus Aurelius became emperor. So, in this one respect, the Epicureans are arguably more similar to the Cynics than the Stoics are to the Cynics. But
Okay.
I wouldn't say that they're more similar in many other respects than that.
Okay. So what are those other ways?
Well, but when you look at the Stoics and the Cynics, Stoicism is basically cynicism without the really shocking taboo behavior. It's
Right.
cynicism that you can take to your grandma's house. It's
Right.
cynicism that you can do in polite company. Epicureanism is significantly, in my view, significantly more divorced from cynicism. Epicureans argued that the virtuous life, the good life, is the life of pleasure and devoid of pain or suffering as much as possible. All right, you
Right.
live your life tending your garden, live your life in conversation with friends. Uh, Epicurus did advocate that we pursue simple, natural pleasures that were easily satisfied. Like he would not have been. Some people associate him with hedonism as is contemporarily understood, sex, drugs, rock and roll. He
Right.
Epicurus would not have been on board with that, even though he was accused of having orgies and stuff like that. I think those are just things that devotees of other schools said about him. I suspect that the same thing might be true of Diogenes. People, there are these legends of him masturbating in public and defecating in public. I don't know that he ever actually did it. That might just be people trying to, characterize him as a lunatic. It's hard to.
Yeah. Yeah, that's entirely possible.
Yeah, I always tell people think of Stoics as cynics who don't jerk off in public and and actually, have friends and have families. Whereas they there's a kind of a misanthropy that goes along with cynicism that appeals to me. Misanthropy, kind of a general distrust of humanity and its rules and its laws and its silly traditions.
I
Uh,
share that too.
yeah, cynics, people like Diogenes, they had no use for 99.9% of the human race. Other than just to chastise them and to go out of their way to irritate them, aggravate them, make fun of them. Other than that, Diogenes thought that our virtue was entirely just dependent upon our own efforts. You don't need other people and their laws and their rules and their silly customs to be a good person. Um, Nature endowed us with we've got hands and mouths and there's food to be had if you're just going to look for it. And you don't need a house. A wine barrel will do. You don't need fancy clothes. One ripped old tunic will do. You don't need fancy food. Just anything that sustains you will do. Extreme austerity, extreme simplicity, and a general disinterest in all the rest of it. A general disinterest in money and fame and power and politics. That's all just a silly puppet show.
Yeah, I
That's my
like that.
yeah.
I kind of agree with most of that perspective, although I think like if you want if you want to not keep things simple, I think that's just as valid too. Like that and the I think it's interesting too. I don't know if this is correct because I just got this from a video that I was watching there where there's this common like this more modern understanding of cynicism seems to be very different from the original meaning of it.
Yeah.
And it's like people think that like if you're a cynic you just hate everyone and everything and think everything is worthless or something like that. And it seemed like you were talking about earlier, like it's more just about focusing on natural pleasures and stuff. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I learned something about how the original like Diogenes' really original understanding of human nature is that humans are still naturally good, but they are distracted by the society, by values that he considers worthless. Is that right?
So that's pretty close. A little oversimplified, but any
Okay.
quick statement always will be. There's a distinction, just like there's a distinction between capital S Stoicism and lowercase s. There's the same capital C Cynicism, lowercase c Cynicism. I can make it pretty quick. Capital C Cynicism, the school of philosophy of which Diogenes is a representative, and Antisthenes and Crates, they advocated simplicity. They thought that if we could behave in accordance with nature and be unconcerned with all the rest of it, we could be good, decent, virtuous people. But almost nobody was, right? Diogenes famously, he was asked. He said he went with his lantern to the town square and said, "I'm looking for a man," and he couldn't
Right.
find. And somebody asked him about it, and have you found a man? He said, I have not found any men. I found boys in Sparta. See, he thought the Spartan lifestyle was closer to the way a man should live. The Spartans,
Oh, okay.
they were tough. They lived an austere life. They lived a much simpler life than in Athens. He thought they were closer to it, right? Lowercase c cynicism in the contemporary sense. A contemporary cynic is someone who is inclined to distrust. They tend to think that motives are always actually self-interested. If you present yourself as altruistic or concerned about the common good, the lowercase c cynic will look askance at you and think, "Yeah, I doubt it, pal. You're profiting from this somehow." You say you work for a charity. Yeah, sure. I bet you're siphoning money out of the charity.
Sounds like just a way to be an asshole.
Well, either that or it's a way of seeing that a lot of people are assholes. One
Yeah,
of the two. And of course, Stoicism, we've talked about the school of Stoicism. You got your four cardinal virtues. You got to focus on wisdom and virtue. Lowercase s Stoicism is just kind of maintaining, um, maintaining kind of an emotionless disposition, right? Stiff upper lip, keep calm, carry on. That's just a disposition. That's just um, an outward behavior. You can do that without pursuing any of the Stoic virtues. So
right,
the meanings of these terms have changed over time. I think that's why at some point it became a convention to resort to uppercase S for the school of philosophy, lowercase s for the demeanor, the disposition, uppercase C for the school of philosophy, lowercase c for the demeanor, the general distrust of humanity, of people, of society.
right.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense.
I hope that helps. I don't know if that
Yeah.
helpful.
No, no, that is helpful. Um, so yeah, do you want to talk a little bit more about Epictetus? Because we were mentioning I was mentioning before we started that I read Epictetus's discourses that you recommended, and I would say that overall, I kind of like the just more simple advice in that book that I mentioned in our previous chat of his The Art of Living.
Yeah.
But I do find his meditations on so many different topics to be really interesting.
Yeah. One thing to point out, it's a subtle difference between reading Marcus Aurelius and reading Epictetus. When you read Epictetus, the discourses or the Enchiridion, it's important to keep in mind those are notes taken by somebody else, this pupil named Arian. Epictetus,
Oh, okay.
yeah, he didn't actually write that stuff down. His pupil Arian wrote down lectures that he gave and conversations he had with other people as he remembered it. Whereas with Marcus Aurelius, you're just reading his journal, you're reading his sort of bedside diary.
Right.
So there's a little bit of a challenge in reading Epictetus because sometimes Arian does not make clear who is speaking to whom. Sometimes he doesn't make it clear that Epictetus is using irony or he's being sarcastic. And
Oh, okay.
it's easy to think he's asserting something when in fact he's making fun of people who assert that.
Oh,
But
okay.
with that out of the way, yeah, Epictetus is definitely my favorite of the Stoics. He does more for me than Marcus or Seneca. I think I would have liked Musonius Rufus if I had more of his stuff to read. So yeah, Epictetus and Diogenes, they're kind of my two heroes from that period. And Epictetus greatly admired Diogenes, which is another reason I always tell people if if your understanding of Stoicism is really divorced from Cynicism, you're probably getting it wrong, or at least you're latching on to a strand of Stoicism that maybe is starting to depart from the taproot of Cynicism. I think of Epictetus as basically a cynic who just did not intentionally indulge in the taboo behaviors. But if you look at the advice he gives to people, there's this one instance, there's a young man he's talking to, and he asks the young man, why he dresses in finery and why he fixes himself up. And the guy ultimately says, well, I'm trying to appeal to women. And Epictetus says, oh, go hang yourself. Right. Which is something Diogenes would say. So look, if you think that's what life is about, if you think that's what's important, go hang yourself. You're a waste of life. He said stuff like that all the time, and a lot of contemporary Stoics tend, in my view, to sort of ignore that component of Stoicism. And so when they attribute cosmopolitanism in the contemporary, what I would call the liberal understanding of cosmopolitanism, yeah, everybody come on in. We don't care where you're from, what your
Yeah.
culture is. Come on in and blow up our society. Sure, we'll endure it. That's not that is not Stoicism. Not as I conceive of it, not at all. Cosmopolitanism is just a commitment to the laws of nature being the primary governor of your attitudes, your beliefs, your behaviors. It's not about everyone being equal. It's not about everyone being mutually compatible. It's not that you can make a case that maybe comes from Cicero later on and his misreading of Zeno's Republic. I think that is a kind of a warped version of cosmopolitanism as it was originally stated. Originally, cosmopolitanism, in my view, just meant this: I have no choice but to obey the laws of the cosmos, the laws of nature. Your laws, man's laws, nonsense. I'll obey them if I feel like it, and if not, I won't. That was cosmopolitanism, in my view.
Oh, okay.
It's
Oh, I
not,
like that. That's an
yeah,
important point.
yeah, it's an important distinction. It's not we are the world, and we should all band together and sing kumbaya. The Stoics and the Cynics were not as naive as that. Oh, I just lost you.
Oh,
You
did
still there?
you?
Yeah, I'm just looking at your that still shot of your face now.
Oh, did you lose my picture?
Yeah, I can't see you. Maybe you can
Okay,
still hear
well,
this.
yeah, if you can still hear me, we can keep going.
Sure, we're good.
Okay. Sorry, what were you saying?
I think I finished up. I was just
Oh,
saying
okay.
that some of the other contemporary Stoics kind of chastise me, and some of them have have gotten some negative reviews or some mixed reviews of my book because they say it's not sufficiently cosmopolitan. Uh,
Oh,
where
really? Wow.
I think they are misreading Stoic cosmopolitanism. And I would add, if it turns out they're right and I'm wrong about what the Stoics meant, well, then the Stoics were wrong about cosmopolitanism. Anyone who believes that we can all live together and all societies and cultures are mutually compatible is just not living in the same world I am. There are lots and lots of groups of people that I don't want living in my neighborhood for very good reasons. And I'm sure there are lots of people who don't want me in their neighborhood for very good reasons. We have
Yeah.
values and behaviors that just will not mesh no matter what we try to do about it.
Yeah, I like that like what according to your view is the more accurate and original interpretation of cosmopolitanism because like I'm all for people trying to coexist with each other as much as possible, but if people don't get along, then they shouldn't try to coexist with each other. Like
Yeah,
the
the as much as possible criterion, I really think is the crucial element of that.
yeah.
Now, you should know that the top Stoics, the big Stoics out there, people like Donald Robertson and Massimo Pigliucci, they think I'm wrong about this. Massimo wrote a really negative review of my book, which is weird because he wrote an endorsement of my book, and then later on, just recently, he published this really negative review of my book.
Oh,
And,
wow.
well, yeah, at first I kind of wondered why, but I suspect it has something to do with the fact that Massimo and Donald, they're both very liberal. I think Donald calls himself a socialist. I'm not sure about Massimo. Whereas I'm very conservative. I voted for Trump, and I think they hate me because of that.
Oh,
so,
yeah.
yeah, so I think
Oh, yeah.
they're just
Peop
sticking it to me. It's like, screw this guy. We're going to ruin the sales of his book. Of course, I'm speculating. Maybe they're just telling the honest truth. Donald's review was not nearly as bad, but there was a lot of there were a lot of thinly veiled jabs, and
Okay.
we've had our run-ins online, but that's all okay with me. I got no beef with it. Those
Oh,
guys,
okay.
I still say read their books, look at their work. We don't have to
Yeah.
agree about politics.
Intellectual curiosity is the best.
Yeah, read
Yeah.
everybody.
I like maybe oh, sorry, I interrupted you there.
It's difficult just because we can't see each other, so I don't mean to break in. I was
That's
just about
okay.
to say you should read. It's probably more important to read people you disagree with, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah,
Otherwise,
I agree.
yourself in an echo chamber, and that's no good. So I read liberals, even though I rarely agree with anything they have to say. I read conservatives. I read people completely disinterested in politics. It's all okay with me.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. I try to do that too. I try to just look at as many different perspectives as possible and then just try to construct my own worldview based on what I like and ignore what I don't like.
Sure. And
And maybe since those other Stoic philosophers have that political interpretation, I wonder if maybe because of that political perspective of your book, maybe one of the reasons they don't like it is because like you're really focused on discipline in your book, and it's like really direct self criticisms and advocations for discipline and just like stop complaining, stop being a bitch,
yeah,
like be a man and do what needs to be done. Like
yeah,
I can see why more left-leaning people would have a problem with that perspective.
yeah, me too. And now, to be fair to those guys, I think disagree with my characterization. They would both say that they're, simply honestly reviewing the contents of the book, and they don't think it's properly Stoic in certain ways. I think they would deny that their ideology has anything to do with their reviews of my book. I just happen to think that they're wrong. I happen to think they're self-deceived. I think that, well, especially in the case of Massimo. I mean, before he knows me, he writes an endorsement of the book. Then he finds out I'm a Trump voter, and he basically retracts his endorsement. I guess it could be a coincidence, but I don't think so.
Yeah.
And as for Donald, like I said, he and I, we've had a few run-ins, and he doesn't like me very much personally. That might influence his review, but it might not. Hey, their criticisms are not entirely without merit. And Donald is also a psychotherapist, so when I tell myself, stop being a little bitch, stop being a pussy, man up, that's not the kind of thing a therapist is going to say to his patients.
Yeah,
So,
of course.
yeah, you can understand he might reject that and think, oh, this kind of self-criticism, extreme self-criticism is unhealthy. Again, I disagree with him about that. I think people like me, especially, sometimes we need a punch in the face. Sometimes we need to punch ourselves in the face to shake us out of our self-pity or whatever the case may be. But I could certainly understand someone who says, nah, that's never healthy. I don't agree, but I can understand it.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, I totally agree. And I think like that for different people at different points in their lives, and even perhaps everyone at different points in their lives, sometimes maybe they need more discipline, and sometimes maybe they need more like positive encouragement,
Yeah,
and maybe for some people one works better than the other. Like it's not necessarily that one is good and one is bad, like you were saying.
exactly.
And in terms of Trump too, it's interesting that you brought that up, because I often get into arguments with people because I'm personally not a big fan of Trump, but I think people get really carried away with their criticisms of him. Like I was arguing with my friend the other day who was saying that Trump is evil, and I was
Yeah,
and I was like, he's not evil, man. He's just like he's selfish and kind of intellectually lazy. So he's perhaps not interested in like in like learning about what the consequences of some of his perhaps more objectionable decisions might be. I don't think he has malice. I like to practice Hanlon's razor, which is that uh, ignorance is often mistaken for malice.
yeah. Don't explain by reference to malice that which can be explained by reference to ignorance, or
Yeah,
something like that.
yeah,
I'd say for me, Trump is a mixed bag in terms of, I think he does have some malicious intent towards some individuals. Of course, I think some of them deserve it. There are people in the media who are just liars, and they do make up nonsensical stories. He calls them out. There are other people that he gets angry at, and it's very petty. He does strike me as very thin-skinned and very petty about certain things. I don't know that I would want to spend time with the guy, but I do think that given the alternatives on the table, he was infinitely preferable to Hillary, especially in terms of immigration restrictionism, these absurd trade deals in which America just gets economically raped for decades at a time. He's pulling us out of those. All these people who hate him, they refuse to acknowledge that the economy is doing really well under him. Um, it's once you let your animus towards a guy cause you to start lying about him, or once you allow the opposite, once you allow your fondness for a guy make you lie on his behalf, you're being intellectually dishonest. Um, so these things come up where there are these stories about Trump cheating on his wife and so on. I don't deny that that's quite probable and quite likely, and I certainly don't approve of it. But that's not uh, that's not salient to me. It's not crucial to me. I don't care if he's a nice guy or not. I want someone who is going to do the job of president, in something like the way I think it ought to be done. And he's a lot closer than Hillary was.
yeah, yeah. I like that perspective. Like if I were an American, I'm not sure I would have voted for Trump. Like I think I probably would have voted for Gary Johnson, that libertarian guy,
Yeah,
even though he wouldn't have won anyway. But
Yeah,
I also think that Hillary is arguably a lot worse for many reasons than Trump.
yeah. I would say they're both equally corrupt. They're both corrupt. They're both liars. It kind of comes down to a question of which form of corruption and dishonesty satisfies more of your goals.
That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, it's which scumbag is your scumbag?
Yeah.
Trump is my scumbag. I actually, I don't have the reaction to him that a lot of people do. I do not have some kind of seething hatred for him. I see what he does sometimes, and I think, oh, he didn't have to say that. But
Yeah.
that's about as far. But the same thing is true. Hillary would say things, and I think, what is wrong with this woman? Calling calling half the country deplorables. But who runs for office doing that? She's just one of the dumbest candidates I've ever heard. So,
And
I don't know.
really
We'll see.
establishment too.
Yeah, very establishment. We'll see how it shakes out. If the Democrats take back the House in November, Trump's presidency, I think, is more or less over with. He won't get anything done. So we'll
Yeah.
see. We'll see. I'm
That's
not.
interesting. I've heard some interesting theories about how he might get reelected, but I mean, it's really hard to say one way or the other what will happen in the future with that.
Yeah, it can change so quickly. If there's a massive terrorist attack, that could change things. If the economy hits the skids in say 2019, it'll be very hard for him to get reelected. We'll see. But
Yeah.
I wouldn't place a bet one way or another right now.
So, to go back for a minute to what you were saying about Cicero, how
Yeah, let's
would
talk
you
about
s- how
philosophy.
would you say how would you say his interpretation of cosmopolitanism is different from your own interpretation?
Well, I can't put too much weight on this, but there's some reason to think that when Cicero read Zeno's Republic, which we don't really have all of anymore, Cicero kind of developed a conception of cosmopolitanism that is much closer to the modern contemporary liberal conception of cosmopolitanism. And Cicero himself, not exactly a Stoic, right? So my guess, and John Sellers has written about this, and some other commentators have written about it. My guess is that this contemporary permutation of Stoicism probably owes more to Cicero's reading of Zeno's Republic than to Zeno's actual Republic itself and to prior Stoic writers. I don't know that I can prove that conclusively, but that's a suspicion I have.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's interesting.
It looks like Cicero had more of an interest in developing a conception of humanity that embraces more of humanity. And if you're trying to run an empire, you probably want a set of values that embraces more people as your empire expands and so on. But that doesn't mean that the original Cynics and Stoics had that in mind. This,
Okay.
this kind of thing happens all the time. There's an initial idea, an initial theory, somebody else latches onto it but uses it for a very different purpose, and you get a kind of a mutation. I think something like that has happened with respect to the concept of cosmopolitanism.
Okay. Oh, that makes sense.
Read if you get a chance, go to academia.edu and read John Sellers' paper on Stoic cosmopolitanism. I don't have the title right in front of me, but I think if you type in Stoic cosmopolitanism and you read what Sellers has to say about it, I think he is probably closest to among the big shot contemporary Stoics, and he's maybe the smartest one of the bunch. I think he's probably closest to getting it right, or at least laying out a set of alternative conceptions of Stoicism that are closer to the alternatives that were available in the ancient world. Uh,
Okay.
it
I'm
was
writing
not,
that down to look up.
yeah, it's Cellars.
ARS. Oh, okay. All
Yeah,
right.
very smart guy. He has a book that just came out. I think it's called Hellenistic Philosophy, and he's written a bunch of stuff about Stoicism. If you want to read a really really smart guy writing about Stoicism, you can't do better than John Sellers. Maybe A. Long is in there.
Okay.
Yeah, they're they're,
So
they're a
sorry.
lot they're a lot smarter than me. I'm just some guy. These are really smart guys.
Oh, well, give yourself some credit. I mean, you seem
Uh,
to a complete amateur like me, you seem really knowledgeable.
yeah, I appreciate that, but that's because you're an amateur. If you read if you read these guys, you'll see what I'm talking about. You read John
Okay.
Sellers, and you'll realize, oh, this Ferraiolo guy doesn't know anything.
I think I'll still talk to you.
All right, fair enough. Fair enough.
Um, so yeah, it would be interesting now to talk about those other philosophies that I mentioned because I would
Sure.
say, like I was talking about earlier, I like to kind of practice that philosophy that based on that Bruce Lee quote, um, take what is useful, ignore what is not, and make it uniquely your own. I would say that I like many aspects of stoicism, like the discipline aspect and ignoring things that are not important, and kind of like the mindfulness aspect that we were talking about in our previous talk about, like experiencing your emotions and then moving on with your fucking day without getting too attached to the past.
Yeah.
But since I've been learning a lot lately, and I mentioned earlier that two of my friends are really interested in both postmodernism and pragmatism, and my friend Hayden Bruce, he has his own podcast called Pragmatic Christian. So
Okay.
that's basically his philosophy that he's kind of developing himself, attaching pragmatism to Christianity. And then I have my other friend, James Sullivan, who has this podcast called James and the Giant Podcast, where he's mostly about postmodernism and and explaining Derrida in particular. And since learning from both of them and also learning a lot from Thaddeus Russell's podcast, and also reading his book, A Renegade History of the United States, which I don't know if you've read, but I thought that was really awesome.
I have,
No?
no, I haven't read it yet.
It's really cool if you want to check it out. It's kind of like how it's kind of like intellectually shitting all over Puritans in a way. It's like looking looking at a perspective of particularly American history from like the underdogs instead of the famous people, and talking about how Puritans like to shit all over things like dancing and drugs and sex and stuff like that. But anyway, he's helped me understand postmodernism a lot more with his explanations, and due to stuff like that, in terms of postmodernism, if we can take that first, I guess.
Okay.
um I think it's really interesting that I've learned from all of that and reading the original postmodernists like Foucault and Derrida, that, for example, like I think we also talked in our previous chat about public intellectuals like Jordan Peterson. I
Yep.
like a lot of what he says, and I argue with some of my friends sometimes in support of him because I like some of his perspectives on things, but I disagree with some of his perspectives on things. And since learning about postmodernism, I I kind of disagree with some of the aspects of it too. Well, I guess I'm talking about way too many subjects at once here, but just to
Okay.
just to go with Jordan Peterson first.
All
He
right.
says he uses terms like like postmodern neo-Marxists and
Yep.
postmodern nihilists, which I think it seems like kind of he's kind of mixing together different realms of philosophy as if they're interchangeable. And it seems to me like Marxists actually often offer some of the best criticisms of postmodernists. And it seems like since Marxists are kind of all about, in a way, replacing one societal structure with their own societal structure, that's against the one of the very natural like the very nature of postmodernism in a way, because postmodernism is more about deconstructing societal structures and it's not about replacing it. And then obviously nihilism is very different from postmodernism too. So I don't know, what do you think about all of that?
All of it.
Yeah, or
uh,
whatever you want to comment on.
All right, well, let me start with this. I'm kind of a fan of Peterson. I like a lot of what he has to say. In particular, I like his the fact that he advocates that young people, young men in particular, start to learn what it is to be responsible and to live up to responsibilities and
Yeah,
stop
I like that
complaining,
too.
stop being snowflakes and so on. I've got no use for snowflakes. And when it comes to postmodernism, I've seen him answer this question about what postmodernism is. And he sometimes says roughly, well, it's Marxism or neo-Marxism combined with something like nihilism. And that's a little bit oversimplified, and it might not even be accurate, but he's doing this on the fly in front of a crowd. So I don't want to impute to him, a theory that he does not really hold. Um, if if by postmodernism we mean a rejection of the claim that there are objective facts, or a rejection of the claim that we have any kind of epistemic access to the objective facts, a rejection of the claim that reason can lead us to the objective facts, then I think postmodernism is, if that's what postmodernism is, and that seems to be part of it, I think postmodernism is a gigantic error. I think it's a gigantic mistake. I think it's pretty clear to me that there were objective facts long before human beings and other cognizers appeared in the universe. In fact, there have to be objective facts for human beings to evolve. There have to be certain conditions of reality that allow for us to evolve, allow for us to develop these big brains and the capacity to engage in abstract thought. Um, I think what happens is what you get are competing world versions or world views that are equally defensible in some sense. And so people say, well, look, this worldview and this worldview, they're incompatible, but they're equally defensible. You can offer a rational argument in support of either of them. Therefore, there is no underlying objective reality. Last inference is a mistake. You can have two competing worldviews that are both, subject to rational, some level of rational justification, but that does not prove that there is not an objective reality about which these worldviews are supposed to, or to which these worldviews are supposed to pertain. Um, so, if postmodernism rejects objectivity, postmodernism is wrong. That's my view. Right? And if Marxism, now, again, depends on what you mean by Marxism and where you're applying it. Um, if if the Marxists kind of um, dialectical materialism, if it's not supposed to be ultimately about some objective material reality, then I think it goes nowhere. It offers us nothing. It's just kind of a freewheel spinning, a theory that doesn't attach to reality. There's got to be an objective material reality for dialectical materialism to to be applied properly and efficaciously. Having said that, I don't think Marx was right about very much of anything. uh,
Yeah.
Perhaps I'm confused about that. Um, I have a visceral reaction to any form of collectivism. For me, collectivism is an absolute last resort. You resort to collectivism when you have to, and there's no other way to survive. But apart from that, um, I'm an individualist through and through. I mean, very much in the mold of Diogenes here. I'm just not as tough as he was, but I don't need a collective telling me what I should believe, what I should say, what I should value. Um, and Marxism, whatever else it is certainly a collectivist philosophy like socialism is. And I just, collectivism gives me a rash. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I'm not like I'm sure not saying that I'm a fan of Marxism because I'm not. Um, I think though that this kind of like the distinction between individualism and collectivism, for one thing, like I would say that I personally agree much more with individualism than collectivism too. But more recently, based on all that I've been learning, I would say that collectivism can have some value too. Like for example, in one of the things that Jordan Peterson advocates for is religion, for example. And those are kind of collective structures and ways that historically have, like, religions have collectively brought people together too, which is one of the reasons that even though I'm an atheist, I have much less of a problem with religion than I used to. And in terms of postmodernism and objective reality, that's actually one thing that I've been convinced by, mostly by my friend's interpretation of postmodernism more than me reading it myself. Just like James Sullivan, who I mentioned, and Thaddeus Russell in particular, explaining it, because I think that because of all that, I think that, like, objective truth and objective reality are at least close to impossible, because we when we determine objective facts, they go through the subjective lens of the scientists who are discovering these objective facts. And I think that, like, if humans didn't exist, for example, there would be no way of knowing whether the world objectively exists or not. Now, that doesn't mean that I think we should entirely reject that notion, though. And I think that, generally speaking, based on, and I'm not an expert on it at all, but based on what I know about postmodernism, they're not necessarily for rejecting all of this and just, like, kind of becoming a cynic like Diogenes and rejecting society. It's just for, according to people I've heard from and read about anyway, it's just about breaking down structures. It's not necessarily about rejecting them entirely. The like living in the world can still be a good thing, and pretending that and behaving as if you're objective. Like, I think Thaddeus Russell, for one example that he's brought up before, is that he doesn't believe in objective reality. However, he still goes on planes and assumes that the plane will fly and the plane is real and acts as if it's real and stuff like that. And I think one of your criticisms makes a lot of sense too, though, how it's like, since postmodernism is really focused on deconstructionism, it doesn't offer like a worldview that's very pragmatic, which is exactly what my friend Hayden Bruce, the pragmatic Christian, brought up, that I agree with. And that's one of the reasons that I still agree with many aspects of Stoicism and pragmatism too, because I think that we should act as if there are many objective truths, whether there are objective truths or not.
Okay, then there's a lot of terminology that's been thrown around there.
Yeah.
Postmodernism.
Oh, yeah. Correct all of my terminology that I might have gotten wrong.
No, no, that's not my purpose here. I'm
Oh,
just
okay. Sure.
viewers of this might want to read up on some of these concepts and
Yeah.
theories. My basic analysis is this. There's and this we're actually approaching the territory that my dissertation covers, which I never thought a conversation about Stoicism would get back to my dissertation because they seem so divorced to me. But in my dissertation, I argued that there has to be an objective reality. One cannot develop any coherent theory whatsoever in the absence of objective reality. However, there can be. I just lost your visual again. I'll keep
Oh,
going.
yeah.
You still?
Yeah. Sorry, I just turned off my camera while I'm getting some more coffee here.
Oh, okay. You don't want people seeing that?
Well, it'll be like nauseating to some people to see the camera move around and stuff.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, there's an objective reality. Now, there might be more than one equally legitimate, equally viable conceptual framework for describing that reality. Take, for example, have you ever read the Thomas Nagel paper, What It's Like to Be a Bat?
Yeah, actually I did in my philosophy of mind class a few years ago.
Okay. Now, I'm going to oversimplify a lot of this, but assume that there is a being that has the brain of a bat, the perceptual apparatus of a bat, but it's just as intelligent as you and me, right? Now, the way we conceptualize reality, the way we organize reality is going to be dramatically different, right? Bats, they're not literally blind. They can see, but not very well. They have this echolocation apparatus in their brains. And so they develop a conceptual scheme of reality by shrieking. And then this apparatus in their brain, for which, to my knowledge, we have nothing that's homologous, nothing that's similar. This sonar-like apparatus in their brain forms a kind of an auditory conception of reality. So if the brain, if the bat and I are in the same room, right, we're gonna I suspect very differently conceptualize the room. I'm going to see colors that the bat probably can't see. The bat is going to hear things that I definitely can't hear, or is going to experience vibrations that I can't experience. But we are in the same room. I mean, I can swat the bat with a tennis racket. We're clearly both experiencing the same objective reality. Our our ways of understanding it might be incommensurable. Maybe we can't even in principle intertranslate them. Um, so I think that's what the postmodernists, deconstructionists, relativists latch onto. There can be these equally legitimate ways of describing reality. That does not entail that there is no underlying objective reality that just is the way it is, irrespective of our conceptions of it. So I'm an objectivist who acknowledges, not an Ayn Rand style objectivist. Uh, there is an
Yeah, that's
objective,
very different.
yeah, very different. There is an objective reality. The best we can do is to perceive it from within a human conceptual and perceptual framework. And of course, that's not going to capture everything. And it may not be unique in the sense of being the only way of describing reality, but the underlying reality has to be real. The reason that your friend hops on planes and flies in them and they don't crash is because there are objective laws of physics governing the flight of that plane. There may be objective laws of physics we have not figured out yet, but those laws of physics regarding aerodynamics and so on, the only explanation for that plane flying and not crashing is that those are objective phenomena, whether we understand them or not, and whether our understanding of them is unique or not. So I would argue.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. I would say that that reminds me of my pragmatist friend, and what he says about, like, when we talk about postmodernism's kind of moral relativism in comparison to, my friend particularly likes William James. William James's moral pluralism. So that's really similar to, like, how there are plural plausible interpretations of reality. And that makes sense to me too. That makes a lot of sense. And it it seems useful to operate in the world that way too. I just think that there's not necessarily objective proof, um, that there is objective reality, and it seems, for one thing, it seems like I think that it seems very plausible and extremely likely. I would just say that, like, I personally would say that there's maybe like a 95% likelihood that there is objective reality or something. I just think that there's a little bit of room for doubt.
Um, uh, I don't think there's actually any room for doubt about the existence of objective reality, but there's room for doubt about the exact nature of it. I think this is where we have a slight disagreement. I think
Okay.
we can, I think we
No,
can
a
be
disagreement is good.
well, we can be absolutely certain, in my view, that objective reality exists. Because were it not for objective reality, you and I couldn't exist. Nothing could exist. Um, where I think there's some room regarding our perceptions of it, our conceptions of it being accurate, being unique. Um, there's a theory called bivalence pertaining to philosophy of language, the theory that any statement is either true or false, and there is no third option. Um, Perhaps there are some cases in which that does not apply. something might be true from this perspective, but false from this competing perspective. Again, some of this stuff is in my dissertation. When we talk about pragmatism, there's another one of these terms. You talk about pragmatic philosophy, people tend to think of Charles Sanders Peirce, William James, John Dewey, and there's a whole sort of philosophical system there. On the other hand, sometimes when we talk about pragmatism, we're talking about the pragmatic theory of truth, the theory that a belief is true or a statement is true if and only if it works, if it is
Yeah,
useful.
that's what my friend's perspective on truth is.
Yeah, pragma is I believe it's a Greek word that means action. So according to pragmatism, two theories are only actually different theories if they would lead you to act differently when confronted with the same data, the same evidence.
Oh,
If
so they're the same otherwise?
otherwise, yeah, if they are for practical purposes the same, if understanding, data set A and data set B, if there's nothing in those two competing data sets that would cause you to act differently, then they're actually the same theory, just couched in different language.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's interesting.
But I'm oversimplifying a bit, but the idea is that if theories X and Y are genuinely different theories, there would have to be some practical application of those theories that would cause you to act differently if you embraced one as opposed to if you embraced the other, right? And so, one way of settling philosophical disputes, according to pragmatism, is asking, if I were to put this theory into action, if I were to act in accordance with this theory, how would I behave? What would I do? What would the results be? Would the results be serviceable, satisfying, useful? Would I be able to accomplish goals? And if the answer is no, this theory would actually prevent me from accomplishing serviceable goals, then you've got a flaw in your theory, right? So a proposition or an element of a theory is true if acting upon that theory or acting upon that proposition works to enable you to accomplish something, to get a particular action, to enact a particular action without stumbling, without, I don't know, running into a conceptual problem. Whereas if let's say there's a proposition that could never affect your actions. Here's an example. Here's a proposition for you. The number of grains of sand on planet Earth right now is an even number. Now,
Okay.
suppose you believe that, suppose you reject that. Can you imagine any circumstance in which it would in any way affect what you do, what you say, what your behavior is?
Not really.
No. So it's not really a proposition, or it's a meaningless proposition because you can't use it to do anything. It's inert. It serves no function. A pragmatist has no interest in that proposition. There's a sense in which it's meaningless because it's useless,
Right.
right? Whereas if you are an evidentialist or if you're a correspondence theorist of truth, you're going to say, well, that proposition is either true or it's false at any given moment in time. Yeah, it's useless. You can't do anything with it. But truth and falsity does not have to be tethered to utility or usefulness. There are lots of propositions that are true, but nothing we can do with them. So, some guy allegedly just solved Fermat's last theorem a couple of years ago, and
Oh, really?
yeah, allegedly. I don't know. I don't know that much. I don't know whether he was ultimately successful, but let's assume he was. Well, unless you're a mathematician, and perhaps even if you are a mathematician, so what? What are you going to do with it? I mean, to my knowledge, you can't use that theorem to build anything, to construct anything. It's just an interesting. It's this interesting mathematical puzzle that was unsolved for a long time. Now, to a pragmatist, all of that effort to solve that theory was useless and perhaps even perverse. It's just mental masturbation. But if you're not a pragmatist, you're probably going to claim, well, his solution, the Fermat's last theorem, is either accurate or it's not. There is a fact of the matter, whether we can do anything with it or not, whether anyone's around to know it or not, right? So I guess I'm trying to flesh out the difference between pragmatism and the pragmatic theory of truth and the correspondence theory of truth, which tends to be associated with objectivist theories of the nature of reality.
Okay.
I
Uh,
feel like I talked for too long there.
oh, that's okay. I went on for a long time before that too.
That's all right.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think my friend who calls himself a pragmatist, I think, like, in terms of Fermat's last theorem, I think he might think that's really interesting too, just because he's really intellectually curious like me. So he might not share like the perhaps more common pragmatist view that like you shouldn't care about stuff like that unless it's useful. But it's interesting too that the perspective of truth that you were talking about, because I've talked with my pragmatist friend about this before, and that's one of the reasons that he likes Jordan Peterson, because Jordan Peterson's basically makes a lot of like psychologically pragmatic arguments for Christianity, which is one of the things that my friend likes to do, and one of the reasons that he still considers himself a Christian. But it's interesting that you compared and contrast those two conceptions of truth. So would you say that that other one, that more objective one, is more both more in common with your own view, or more in line with Stoicism, or one or the other?
It's definitely more in common with my view. I am a correspondence theorist of truth. I've actually written some papers about this. I actually make the case that any coherent theory of truth, ultimately upon analysis, is going to devolve into the correspondence theory, if it's viable at all. That we don't want to get into that. So yeah, I'm a correspondence theorist, and it is the facts that make any truth bearer, a statement, a belief, etc. It's the facts themselves that make a statement either true or false. It's not whether it's useful. It's not how we feel about it. Now, some statements inherently involve subjectivity, right? Um, there might be the statement "it is uncomfortably hot in here" might be true relative to my interests, but false relative to someone else's interests, right?
Yeah.
Some people like it colder than others. Um, and we can, there are all sorts of perceptual. If you ever look at these kind of Gestalt figures, like a Necker cube, or the old woman, young woman Gestalt figure, where if you adopt one perceptual perspective, you see a young woman. If you adopt another perspective, you see an old woman. And there's no further fact of the matter. It's just there's two different ways to see this thing.
Mm-hmm.
That might be, there's a case in which I would argue that the objective nature of the photo renders these two equally legitimate interpretations, and there's nothing more to say about it, right? So there is relativity kind of supervening on objective reality. This is my perspective. But
Okay.
ultimately, if you make a true statement, if you identify the perspective, the conceptual or perceptual perspective from which you're making a statement, and if you identify and properly understand the meaning of the statement, then that statement is either true or it's false, period. And if two people disagree about whether it's true or false, one of them is wrong. If you want to read this, but I wrote this response to a book that came out years ago. It's called Philosophy in the Flesh. It's about embodied cognition and the correspondence theory of truth. And I argued that the authors were just wrong. They had just badly misunderstood the correspondence theory. That's on my academia.edu page if you want to read it. Again, there are smarter people out there to read than me about this stuff. But ultimately, my central complaint about postmodernism is the rejection of objective fact. I think we literally cannot make sense of a theory that denies there are objective facts. You can deny that there is one and only one uniquely correct description of the facts. And I think that's probably right. But there are objective facts. It's just that the objective facts do not necessarily specify one and only one accurate description of them. There can be competing conceptual frameworks that are incommensurable, untranslatable, that are both accurate, but they both are ultimately directed at and pertain to the same objective reality. It just might be describable in more than one way.
Okay. So would you say that objective reality is the most objective view of reality? Because you were saying that they're like it can be described in different ways, but all of the different ways of describing it, there are different ways of describing the same thing.
Yes, here's the way I would put it. Objective reality, um, just is the way it is, right? Long before people existed, there was objective reality. If we all drop dead tomorrow, there will be an objective world that is the way it is. We evolve, we show up on the scene with these perceptual apparatus in this brain, and so we organize reality in a certain way or a certain set of ways. Had we evolved quite differently with different perceptual apparatus, very different brains, like a bat brain, we would organize reality in significantly different fashion. But it would still be an organization of an understanding of the same thing in and of itself, the same reality in and of itself. We probably cannot get past the base level conceptual and perceptual facts that pertain to our species. But I can't see everything a snake can see. I can't hear everything a dog can hear. We refer to the visual spectrum because there's much more to the electromagnetic spectrum that we can't perceive, but we know that some other animals can. So there's good reason to believe that we cannot perceive reality as it is in and of itself in every conceivable respect. And then you start reading a bit of quantum mechanics, and it gets really weird once you get down to
Yeah.
so, and you get states of superposition, and it gets enormously complex. The simplest things get enormously complex. But there's what I call the emergence problem. If there is not an objective reality prior to the existence of minds that conceptualize it, then there is no explanation of where those minds came from. There is no explanation of the emergence of minds out of the sort of primordial, non non-mental, non-conceptualizing world. We had to evolve out of it somehow. So the objective world has to be there first in order for us to pop out of it. And then we pop out of it and we see it and we perceive it and we hear it. And we do so imperfectly and only partially. I think that's what leads to relativism and what leads to, deconstruction and postmodernism and all that kind of stuff. They have latched on to conceptual relativity that is defensible in lots of ways. They let it penetrate too far down into their theory. They let it penetrate right down into the world itself, and that's where I think you get incoherence. You start getting you get a theory built on no foundation ultimately, right? You get this sort of self-refuting. The old paradox. There are no objective facts. Okay, is that an objective fact? If
Yeah. I've
if it
heard
is,
that. I've heard that objection before too.
yeah. Well, if that's an objective fact, then it's self-refuting. If it's not an objective fact, then why should I take it seriously?
Yeah.
Why should I be bound by it? So now that's a simple and trite objection, but I think there's substance there. You know,
Yeah. I would say that and like I said, I'm not an expert on any of these realms of philosophy, but I would say that if not the original philosophers like Foucault and Derrida, if I'm it's possible that I'm misunderstanding them, but it doesn't seem like they claim that there objectively is no objective reality. It seems like they're kind of trying to break down the concept of objective reality, and because of that very criticism that you brought up too, I thought that was a good one when I heard it before, that it sounds like an objective statement to say that there is no absolute truth, which is why I personally kind of adopt the position that it's not objectively true that there is no objective reality. It just seems like it's possible that there's no objective reality, and it's not it's not objective. Like there is a little bit of doubt that there is objective reality.
that's where I depart from it. I don't.
Yeah.
I actually think it is impossible to maintain the proposition, the truth of the proposition. There is no objective reality without self-contradiction. I think it becomes incoherent upon analysis that there is no objective reality. However, I think the moment you get at one conceptual remove from reality itself, I think you immediately do start to get some conceptual relativity. And I, I think in some cases, the inability to penetrate down to reality itself and to kind of directly perceive reality itself from the God's eye view, so to speak, that causes people to say things like, well, there is no objective reality. When I think what they mean or what they should say is, we may not be able to access objective reality. There is such a thing, but we may not be able to get to it, understand it, perceive it, or even conceive it properly. This is kind of the point Kant was making. Kant talked about the noumenal realm and the phenomenal realm. He said all you can know about the noumenal realm is that it exists, right? The noumenal is sort of objectivity. You could know that it exists. The phenomenal realm, our perceptual experiences and our sensations. I'm oversimplifying, but what we experience, that we experience what we do because of objective reality, but we can't know that it's unique. We can't know that there's no alternative, right? We're kind of locked in the world of our perceptions and our sensations and our conceptions,
Yeah.
right? But the world itself, um, that's just there, and our job is to do the best we can to make some sense of it. But we shouldn't expect to make sense of it in its entirety, or in a way that's uniquely unchallengeable or something like that. And by the
Okay.
way, much of what I just said is not properly attributable to Kant. Kant would not accept everything I just said. I'm just uh, what's Kantian about it is the distinction between the noumenal and the phenomenal realms. I'm using that to kind of ground my distinction between the world in itself and our conceptions of the world in itself.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's interesting.
I try
This
to
is
say interesting things, but I often fail.
yeah. No,
Hey,
that's really interesting. Like I would say I would just say that uh, like obviously you're a lot more knowledgeable about philosophy and various discussions on these subjects than me. So I'm not like and actually it would be against it would be against the idea of postmodernism to say that I'm right and you're wrong. And also I personally don't label myself as a postmodernist, and I don't label myself as belonging exclusively to any particular realm of philosophy. Like I said earlier, I like some aspects of all of these different philosophies: Stoicism, Pragmatism, Cynicism, and Postmodernism, and but I disagree with some aspects of them too. I would just say that if if like you said, if it's possible that we can't access objective reality, then how do we objectively know that it does exist?
I would say we can't access it in a uniquely unchallengeable fashion. That doesn't mean we can't access it. I think we have to access it. Otherwise, our thoughts and our sensations would have no content at all. So we do have access to objective reality. I don't know that we can prove that this description of it is that we can be absolutely certain it's correct and it's the only correct description. That's the part I'm not so sure about. But we have access to it. We bump into it all the time. We we move through it all the time. Of course, so does the bat, and so does the so does a neutrino, and so does a single-celled organism. And uh, I would never claim that I know with absolute certainty that the way things seem to me are the way that things are objectively. I hope so. I will say this: if two theorists disagree about the nature of reality, at least one of them is wrong. They might both be wrong, but if they have incompatible theories, at least one of them is wrong, and that is a an objectivist claim in the sense that if at least one of them has to be wrong, then it has to be the world itself that makes it the case that at least one of them is wrong. I would say
Okay.
that. And
Um,
I
would you
hate to
say,
go ahead.
sorry,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
would you say then that if one theory is wrong or and one theory is right, then that we can objectively know which person is right and which person is wrong?
Maybe and sometimes.
Okay.
Like if for example, if I say all Euclidean triangles have three sides and have 180 degrees of internal angles, and if you say no, that is not the case, I would argue that I am right. I'm quite certain that I am right. I don't know if I'm epistemically certain in the sense that it's not even conceivable I could be mistaken, but I'm pretty close to that. And if you deny that all Euclidean triangles are three-sided and have 180 degrees of internal angles, you're wrong, and you're as close to being demonstrably wrong as we can ever hope to get. I'm perfectly comfortable saying you're wrong, and conversation over. But notice we don't get into that main debates about Euclidean triangles, right? If we're making moral claims or claims about the world of politics or economics, we're much less likely to get to that point where we ought to be comfortable saying, I'm clearly right, and anyone who disagrees is clearly wrong. It's much harder to get there. Um, I think we can get closer to that than some people want to admit. I think there are some cases in which there are certain propositions and theories that are as close to being clearly wrong as we could ever hope to get, and they're really not worthy of continued debate. Like if you're a member of the Flat Earth Society, don't waste my time. It is in some sense conceivable you could be right, but that conceivability is so remote, I decline to waste time thinking about it. If you think the Earth is flat, you're wrong. We're done. I'm moving on. If it turns out you're right, okay, you'll be right. But I doubt it so vigorously, so thoroughly that I don't waste time thinking about it. Apart from propositions like that, yeah, there's a lot of room for dispute. And this is what I was about to say. I hate to do this to you because I did this to you last time,
Oh,
but I'm gonna. My wife's gonna be home soon, and it's my turn to cook tonight.
oh, okay.
I've been learning how to cook this year,
Oh,
so
cool.
I got to start. I got to start prepping the chicken.
Okay. All right. Well, I really appreciate this conversation, man. And like I said, like regardless of whether we agree or disagree, I'm just all about learning as much as possible. And I think you're a really valuable person to learn from.
I appreciate you saying that and thinking that. I tend to disagree. I don't think I'm very valuable to learn from, and there are a lot better people. But hey, if it works for you and for your viewers, I'm happy to participate. Maybe we can do this kind of thing again sometime.
Yeah, for sure. I would look forward to it, man. And like before we talk, I'll look up those other papers and books that you mentioned before we talk next time too.
Okay.
Yeah, and of course, by
A little bit
Bill's
of the
book
hard
here,
sell.
Meditations on Self-Discipline and Failure. I've
Yeah.
quoted many passages from this myself on the social medias.
Yeah. Hey,
Uh,
did you go to Amazon and review it? Leave a review of it?
I don't think I did actually. I should do that. I will
If,
do
if
that.
you don't, if you don't mind, and honestly, whether it's a 5 star or 1 star, whether you loved it or hated it, all I ask is just honesty. But yeah, more reviews probably sell more copies. And hey, I like money.
Yeah.
Even if it's not objectively valuable, they let me buy shit with it. So
Yeah, exactly. All right, so yeah, I'll just say all the things I like to say at the end of my podcast here, and then you can offer any more plugs, like your the where people can go to find your academic papers and your other books and stuff like that.
yeah, that works.
Um, so yeah, thanks everyone for watching another episode of the Mindgasms podcast. Hope you enjoyed watching this conversation as much as I enjoyed having it. And as I like to always say, thank you so much for everyone who's subscribed to my YouTube channel. Thank you for everyone who's contributed to me on Patreon, and thank you so fucking much to anyone else who subscribes to my channel and to anyone who contributes to me on Patreon. I really fucking appreciate it. And as I always say, I love you all. Keep being the tiny beam of light that shines through the almost impenetrable darkness in the universe. And most importantly, always remember this: the funk cures all. All right. Keep having mindgasms, everyone. And any more plugs there or last words, Bill?
I'm still trying to figure out what it means to say the funk cures all. And by the way, is that
Yeah.
an objective fact?
Sorry?
Is it an objective fact that the funk cures all?
Yeah, that's my one objective truth.
All right. But,
I
but
say
well,
that jokingly though.
may the may the funk be with you. I've
Yeah.
plugged myself enough. It's okay.
Okay.
Type my name into Google and you find whatever you want.
Yeah. And I'll add the links for your page at your college there too. Is that where people can find your writing?
There is a link there, but the more direct way is to go to academia.edu.
Okay.
It's just a web it's a I don't know what you call it. It's a site where academics post their various publications. So
Okay.
you go to my webpage or John Sellers or whomever, and you can read their stuff.
Okay. Awesome. All right. Well, yeah, like I said, thanks so much for talking. And I hope we can talk again. And I'm just all about always learning as much as possible. So hopefully we can have a great discussion again sometime soon. And yeah, go enjoy learning more about cooking and stuff like that.
Yeah, I gotta, it's pragmatically valuable. Keeps
For
the wife
sure.
happy. Happy wife,
Yep.
happy life. All right.
Yep. All right. All right. Thanks so much and adios until next time, everyone.
See you later.